Greetings all, and welcome to the 20th episode of the V.T.P, or the Veteran Trainer's Perspective. Today, I have something very special to show you all that I've been working to do for a very long time now. And if you have any interest in the Ultra Beasts known to mankind, then this is the presentation for you. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be examining how the Ultra Beasts are adapted to their unique homeworlds, the ones that they originate from.
The Ultra Beasts have always been a fascinating group of creatures, with forms so seemingly alien and bizarre to many that some could be mistaken for not believing them to be Pokémon at all. And to be blunt, to even call them Pokémon is to open a can of worms that will drag in the definition of what Pokémon actually are and or what attributes define them, and that's a conversation that needs an entire episode devoted to it on its own. What can be clearly seen, however, is that many of these extra-universal beings tend to wreak havoc in a world and are clearly not meant to occupy it at all, more often than not posing a danger to terrestrial life forms. However, with this said, it does beg a question then. If they are not adapted for our world, then what sort of environment has given rise to them? What do they call home, a habitat, and how are they adapted to live within those specific environments? That is the topic of discussion today, analyzing their homeworlds and seeing what anatomical and even behavioral traits allow them to thrive as a common life form in the worlds they originate from. The following entries on this subject will be looking specifically at the different worlds these Ultra Beasts occupy and come from, if they can be determined, with the name of each Ultra Beast in the world they occupy, followed by a description of their homeworld or the best that can be drawn from their anatomy and behavior, and then a description of how their forms and behavior might be adaptations for the specific homeworld, and in some cases, how these attributes might reflect the homeworld if it is not inherently known. As a warning though, only 6 of the 11 known Ultra Beasts have worlds that are fully known and understood to be their point of origin, so the identities of the others were essentially reverse engineered from what information is already known about the creatures. Moreover, any mentioning of terrestrial environments or organisms specifically references those here on Earth that we are the most familiar with. It is lastly noted that this list will not include the members of the Cosmog family or Necrozma, given that their status as Ultra Beast is not entirely certain.
With that, let's get started and examine these creatures and the homeworlds in greater detail.
Nihilego. Ultra Space Homeworld, Ultra Deep Sea. The Ultra Deep Sea is a sea of some sort at the very least, but not one that might seem conventional at first for terrestrial life forms. Instead of being a sea of water or some other liquid, it is a sea of air and seems to be located in a deep underground cavern system. Here, the air acts as a fluid within which organisms seem to float and swim through or otherwise live in, and the inside of the cavern system seems to be lined with diamond-shaped crystals, large bioluminescent coral-like organisms with upward-turned caps that grow in pillar-like formations, smaller coral-like structures with multiple lighted components on their form, and rounded structures with glistening glowing bulbous caps, which may potentially be Nihilego polyps if they reproduce in a way similar to some species of jellyfish, given their presence around them. These structures and their bioluminescent qualities seem to be the sole source of light in the inside of the Ultra Deep Sea, and thus act as wayfarers for anyone that finds themselves lost in this cavernous space. The fact that moisture seems to still come into this terrain, given the damp nature of the rock forming the floor of the cavern, suggests that it may exist as an isolated pocket in an ocean world, a world whose surface is almost completely covered in some sort of liquid, deep below the surface, though this cannot yet be definitively proven. What does seem to be striking about this location is that, unlike all of the other known Ultra Space homeworlds, it is entirely self-contained and there does not seem to be a way to access it from the outside, suggesting that the life inside is likely trapped or otherwise mostly contained inside the space, and thus has had to adapt to this closed-off world without a semblance of serious choice. The basic anatomy of Nihilego, though seemingly odd, is actually quite close to that of terrestrial jellyfish, merely adapted for life inside of an air-filled space than a liquid ocean. As a result, while their forms seem physically frail, the crystalline material comprising them is able to support itself in the air without any serious substantial fluid for assistance, and they're able to swim or otherwise levitate in the air through the release of lighter-than-air gases from the inside of the membranes, which itself are flexible for greater maneuverability in the air, only stiffening into a solid sheet when extreme physical shock is applied to it. Their apparent lack of eyes also makes sense in light of the enclosed space of the natural habitat, where light is not as important for navigation, being able to sense the electromagnetic fields given off by other creatures and objects in place of color sight, which might also explain the capacity to readily identify other creatures aside from their own kind in more open environments. Their airspace adaptation is further seen in the strange structures found in the back parts of the Ultra Deep Sea, where we can observe formations that very closely resemble jellyfish polyps. They are merely inverted, placing the broader part of the polyp face down, which would offer greater stability in developing out of a supporting medium like water. They also seem to possess statocysts that allow them to balance, as well as ropallium to help them navigate up and down, the microscopic crystals typically found in these structures being replaced with denser crystalline material to allow them to still use them for gravity detection. As far as the poison-type nature goes, it has been observed that Nihilego produce a neurotoxin that allows them to influence the behavior of other organisms in order to mold them into a figure that will take care of them and protect them against other creatures. The fact that they naturally produce this toxin is a strong hint that they likely exist as prey in the homeworld and are not at the top of the food chain, so to speak, which itself also suggests that there are far more dangerous and powerful creatures that may live with them within the ultra deep sea. This makes further exploration of the world a troubling prospect, and considering they're able to go so far as to fuse with other creatures to lend them greater power, their parasitic nature seems to be a likely product of them relying on larger entities to protect them until they can successfully reproduce and continue to support the population numbers. As such, they can be a scourge to all other forms of life for their capacity to survive outside the native environment and ability to turn others to the cause of their survival alone, even if the attributes that make them so aren't even enough to make them the most fearsome force to encounter in the natural environment. Buzzwole. Ultra Beast Homeworld, Ultra Jungle. The Ultra Jungle consists of a massive jungle landscape with a warm tropical climate and countless trees that form a thick canopy that makes it nigh impossible to see the ground below them, with several much larger trees sprouting up and forming what looks to be the visage of a flexing figure of some sort at the very top of their structure. These massive trees are connected by a series of thick vines that act as pathways between them, though it is uncertain if the vines have naturally grown this way or have actually been cultivated into this form by other forces. In addition to the trees, there is a visible river on the floor of the canopy area that snakes around the larger trees beneath these bridges, and given that the water looks to be clean of major toxins and pollutants, it is likely that it may support a thriving ecosystem on the floor of this location. Furthermore, there is an active volcano present in the observed section of this world, and it is very much active, as it regularly produces minor eruptions that blast out both lava and volcanic bombs. While it is not currently known just how genetically close one could consider Buzzwole to be to terrestrial mosquitoes, the choice of habitat makes sense in this comparison, as terrestrial mosquitoes typically require bodies of water where the eggs can be laid and the larvae can be safely developed, and this long river that seems to snake through their habitat, as well as the human and tropical environment of the ultra jungle as a whole, is highly conducive to this. They seem to be fully sustained by sucking out the vital fluids of other creatures for sustenance, and while this would suggest that they share their territory with creatures large enough to be reliable resources in this respect, it also suggests that all observed specimens may be female in form, as only female terrestrial mosquitoes are known to drink the blood and vital fluids of other creatures in order to acquire the extra protein they need to make their eggs. However, what makes these beasts interesting on this note is that they actually seem to make their nests in volcanic environments, with direct observations pointing to the interior of an active volcano in the homeworld. It is possible that the extreme physical strength and resilience of these beasts may have developed as a way of aiding them in making nests in the harsh and rugged terrain featured in this particular choice of nesting habitat, using boulders to create areas where the nests are protected by the extreme heat given off by present lava, given that they are still weak to the fire type in practice. This would also then tie into their penchant for feeding off creatures, as their immense strength is fueled by them pumping their muscular bodies full of vital fluids to sustain their power, not to mention that their segmented legs could allow for better traction in rugged terrain, and their ability to fly is useful for getting out of danger quickly. As far as their behavior goes, it is important to note that Buzzwole are known to communicate with others by flexing, and while this might seem odd at first, the massive trees that dot the landscape that have forms at the top that resemble flexing figures may be connected to this. Buzzwole may have taken after these figures and formed their own form of communication with the unusual trees as the base, and may even get some of the strength from sucking on the sap inside of these special trees, though this last note is currently speculation at best, as has not been directly observed. Regardless, this shows that the creatures are far more intelligent than some would expect, and the penchant for showing kindness to other bug-type Pokémon, even those unknown to them, show them to be fairly peaceful and only aggressive when they see something they do not recognize as an insectoid of some sort enter into their personal territory. Pheromosa. Ultra Beast Homeworld, Ultra Desert. The Ultra Desert is a rough landscape covered with copious amounts of sand, but it is clear that it is not a sand desert in its entirety, as numerous rock formations are noted in the area, some of which are quite massive in size and stick out of the landscape prominently. Moreover, the stone is not isolated to just the ground in these formations, as there are massive blocks that seem to have been quarried out of the ground, and taller structures exist that may either be natural or the product of stoneworking. The terrain of the area, as noted, is rather rough in some places and sharp enough to be dangerous to travel on foot for the most part, rendering it fairly inhospitable to life forms not equipped to handle the jagged terrain. The desert also seems to be one where rain does at least come in frequently, as plant life is present in the form of small shrubs that are embedded within the ground, though whether or not there are substantial sources of groundwater for support is currently unknown. However, the most noticeable aspect of the terrain that sticks out is the presence of massive turquoise-colored crystals that seem to dominate much of the stone located in this environment, as they shine brightly in the sunlight and seem to be of gem quality in even the largest of specimens. The exact composition of these crystals is currently unknown, but given that there seems to be large-scale structures built from rock with said crystals embedded within it, it seems to be stable enough for it to be worked and roughly sculpted for visual aesthetics in potential architecture. The biological attributes of Pheromosa clearly demonstrate an insectoid form that is closest to certain types of terrestrial cockroaches, but while those creatures are adapted to life in dark, damp environments, Pheromosa are able to use their bodies and the developed fighting-type attributes to endure the harsh desert environment that serves as their primary habitat. First of all, these creatures are able to deal with extreme heat and sun exposure with a massive wing veil attached to their head, not only using it as a sun shield, but also using its wide surface to fan themselves to at least some degree to cool off. While shade seems to be hard to come by in the ultra desert, these creatures are able to mitigate this by taking on a bipedal stance and a lithe frame, which not only minimizes the amount of their frame that is exposed to the sun, but also allows them to run at extremely high speeds to get between points of shade as quickly as possible. Plus, it can allow them to move around awkward and rough terrain with ease, flexing their bodies in ways that terrestrial roaches are incapable of performing. However, they do share with them a set of long antennae that they use to perceive their surroundings and detect the presence of food particles, other Pheromosa, potential dangers, and other materials, and they habitually keep themselves clean to the point of hating any and all grime as a way of keeping their forms from being slowed down and their antennae from being disrupted in their needed duties. Moreover, their capacity to generate pheromones that essentially cause creatures exposed to them to pause and rapture towards them long enough for the creatures to make an escape or otherwise dominate the target suggests that Pheromosa may be preyed upon by some unknown creature, and it seems to serve them well both behaviorally and socially in keeping their frail forms from being put in the pathway of harm. However, the aspect that is perhaps the most fascinating about them is that their unique find-type attributes may come into play here in their environmental adaptations, as it has been observed that large pieces of stone and even completed architecture of a sort exist out in the open within the ultra desert, with what looks to be pit holes associated with them. While some of these could possibly be natural in nature, the structure of the larger specimens seems to act as a useful source of shade and likely protection from rain, which may suggest that the stone witnessed in such a state may have been quarried by Pheromosa, and turn meaning that they are intelligent enough to act as stone workers in their habitat. This can further be extrapolated to state that their potent fighting-type attributes may have been developed and perfected in order for them to quarry stone from the ground of their desert abode, or even shape standing columns of stone to fit their needs, presenting them as far more intelligent and gregarious than might otherwise be implied from their biology and behavior alone. Circuitry. Ultra Beast Homeworld. Ultra Plant. The Ultra Plant is a landscape that is covered and dominated by stormy skies that are always brimming with lightning, and the charge difference between the ground and the air is strong enough that the storm's electrical activity in this habitat seems to be perpetual in its duration. The ground itself is sometimes covered from sight in a hazy mist, with the landscape mainly dominated by large monoliths of stone that seem to jut out of the hillocky surface to incredible heights. The presence of thunderstone-like objects around the stony monoliths in this world suggests that the ground is constantly energized from lightning strikes, which also might explain why some of these monoliths are connected by the appendages of giant circuitry specimens, their wiry bodies acting as bridges between these units. This may suggest that they have to embed themselves deeply into the stone in order to absorb as much electrical power as possible. Regardless, it is clear that the land is one ravaged by lightning for vast distances, as circuitry can be seen far into the distance from any vantage point, with their bodies lighting up as they are struck and energized by the storm above. The unusual body forms of circuitry are a direct product of their environment in almost every way, as they are highly specialized for thriving in the intense electrical world they commonly are found in. The interior of the body cavity is made from organically grown copper that splits and frays at their arms into finger-like strips, allowing electrical charges to flow freely through their bodies, as well as serving as the skeletal base for their feet and tail, and is contained almost entirely within a thick rubber-like outer coating that not only acts as the musculature, but also doubles as an insulative covering to prevent electrical discharges if they accidentally come into contact with anything that can conduct an electrical charge readily, especially other circuitry. Their head is the main source of energy in them, as it acts as both a storage center for electrical energy and a generator of it as well, though they are more than capable of releasing bursts of electrical energy at the rate faster than what they can actually replenish on their own. This seems to work fine for them in the homeworld, however, as they are able to plug their entire bodies into the ground and use it as a recharging station, taking electrical energy from the ground the same way that they have been observed conducting themselves outside of the Ultra Plant. The way in which they do this, however, also causes them to take on a body stature that successfully grounds them at the same time, and this is necessary as in the Homeworld, the most efficient means of energy replenishment there is actually waiting to be struck by lightning, and they aid this by raising themselves as high as they possibly can to make it more likely for them to be struck. They may further assist in this otherwise normal operation by inducing a charge in the central head that helps to attract electrical charges of the opposite polarity related to the lightning overhead, though this is not entirely certain. At the very least though, this does not go unnoticed, as it seems that becoming electrically charged allows them to flash their headlights in specific patterns, using them as a form of communication among members of their own species. Moreover, the flexibility of their forms, while somewhat disturbing to some, actually allows them to freely plug their bodies into any crevice they can get into in order to partially ground themselves and set a pose for energy absorption, so the adaptation works well for the given terrain. As a final note here, the circuitry that are often encountered by trainers seem to be the only ones that can freely move, as observations on massive circuitry, whose size alone suggests that encountered specimens outside this ultra homeworld are merely juveniles at best, lends credence to the thought that they may eventually dig their frames into the ground firmly enough into adulthood that they become rooted in place, doing so to conserve on power for the massive amount that's actually needed to sustain their forms. Celesteela. Ultra Beast Homeworld, Ultra Crater. The land that the Ultra Crater is situated in is inundated with red blocks of igneous rock and craters across its rocky surface, and is clearly a world that is geothermically active. The sky of the world is tinted a vibrant shade of yellow, likely from sulfurous compounds in the atmosphere from geothermal activity, as while many of the craters present on the surface are created by Celesteela, many of them are also filled with an unknown green liquid. Given that numerous steam geysers also occupy the landscape, it is likely that these pools are thermal pools, with the color indicating a nutrient-rich state. These thermal pools seem to be linked in close proximity with portions of the landscape where Celesteela grow and develop, always within reach of them, and are part of a crisscrossing network of metallic organic pipes that likely funnel the nutrient-rich liquid to Celesteela beneath the hard crust of the surface terrain. The landscape also seems to be ever active in its subsurface geology, with tremors and earthquakes common not just from geologic activity, but also from the massive force that matured Celesteela apply to the ground as they detach from their underground root systems and fly off to other locations, and potentially even other worlds. The environment that Celesteela are acclimated to within the Ultra Crater is one that naturally provides them a high concentration of dissolved and essential minerals and other nutrients within thermal pools, which they need to survive, and it's not only the likely reason why they naturally grow to such extreme sizes for a Pokémon, but also may explain why on Earth and terrestrial environments they tend to completely drain large patches of soil of nutrients wherever they go, leaving almost nothing for further plant life to feast upon. The overall life cycle is further connected to the nutrient-rich thermal pools that are seen in the Ultra Crater, as a thick network of metallic tubes that serve as their roots allow these creatures to begin their growth underground and funnel the liquid into their bodies as they grow and push up and out of the hard ground they are normally encased within, only violently detaching and uprooting themselves when they have finally reached a state of full maturity. The hard metallic covering on their form seems to be linked to this and their life cycle, as it likely acts as a heat shield that not only helps to keep them safe from scouting liquid they feed upon, likely cooling it internally as they inject it into the systems, but also to keep them from burning their outer flesh when they blast off with their arms, which derive their fuel from the volatiles likely absorbed both through their root systems and the sulfur-rich atmosphere of their habitat. Speaking on their penchant for using explosive force to uproot themselves from their spawning positions, it seems that the arms of these creatures are only linked to the main body through electromagnetism in order to not only lessen the chances that the limbs could be damaged or ripped off during takeoff if they were directly attached, but also to decrease the amount of energy they need to actually launch, as their arms are the only masses that require direct force for initial takeoff, the rest of their form being dragged along for the ride. Lastly, the fact that their bodies are able to launch them high enough into the air to possibly be capable of flight in space is likely a tactic for them to preserve the nutrient density of their birthing grounds. Limiting the number of Celesteela present in an area by colonizing locations far away from where they are born eases the pressure off of resources in the face of an otherwise booming population, rendering their world sustainable and able to recover and resupply nutrients to generations of Celesteela without easily running out. Kartana. Ultra Beast Homeworld, Ultra Forest. The Ultra Forest bears a striking resemblance to terrestrial forests, and is known for its abundance of trees and even bamboo plants, the environment having a seemingly temperate climate with plenty of greenery to be seen. However, the greenery is not entirely familiar, as the trees that have been observed and studied here have rectangular leaves, and many of the brilliant flowers have a shape to them that is very close to that of Kartana. The soil seems to be typical for terrestrial soil and composition, but artificial paths do exist in the area and are comprised of a sandy substrate that is easy on the feet and moves around quite easily. What is quite unexpected, however, is that the world seems to be occupied by human-like creatures as well as other native species found in it, with those observed being kendo performers assigned a special trainer class known as the Ultra Beast Cartonvoy. They seem to act as guardians for native Kartana, as well as wielders of their kind, though they uniquely do not have any of their Pokémon contained within capture devices of any sort. Kartana are unique among Ultra Beasts in that their behavior and biological attributes may likely be linked to the existence of humans, or at least humanoid entities, within their own homeworld. As far as the physical forms go, it is apparent that these creatures are plants to some degree or another, as their bodies in the shape of leaves among the trees and other plants in the world hint towards their blocky forms being natural and formed by association, which both matches up with their noted grass-type powers and would explain why they react noticeably to extreme heat and moisture. However, what is more interesting is that their capacity to cut through just about anything, while also demonstrating notable physical resilience against attack, can likely be connected to kendo practitioners that seem to populate their natural habitat. Now, it cannot be clearly said whether Kartana's forms adapted to the presence of this art of combat from native influence, or if native humanoids took after them instead, but what is clear is that the organic compound that covers their form, aside from making them glossy, allows the edges of their body to hone to an edge so sharp that they can cut through wood, stone, and metal with almost no resistance, which could be linked to the weapons used as part of kendo and is reflected in the steel-type assignment. Given that the species and the humanoids of the world can seemingly coexist together peacefully without the need of capture devices, this attribute could function as a way to cut through forests and allow for pathways and settlements to be constructed by humanoid hands, as seen within the Ultra Force clearly. Their shock-absorbent bodies can also be seen as reflecting the padded armor that kendo practitioners possess to protect against harm, and the capacity to seemingly speak any language, albeit backwards, could easily offer up links between them and native humanoids through direct verbal communication. As a whole, while it is not entirely apparent whether the art of fighting of these beasts came first within the respective Ultra Homeworld, the clear connection to the humanoids of that world and their combat art is too striking to not be seen as a direct reflection of the natural biology and behavior. Guzzlord, Ultra Beast Homeworld, Ultra Ruin. The Ultra Ruin is difficult to analyze in detail like other homeworlds covered previously, as it is merely a ruined and destroyed version of a parallel universe of our own. However, what can be discussed and hypothesized on is what exactly makes it a valuable world for Guzzlord. While the exact details of the reproductive life cycle of Guzzlord are still a mystery, it is likely that they are marauders in their origins, namely that they arrive from distant worlds unto others, such as our own Earth, likely contained within a large hard egg-like vessel in order to keep their bodies from burning up in another planet's atmosphere. Once they have arrived on a planet, they will seek to consume everything they can on the surface, no matter what they might come across. Because their forms require a massive amount of energy to function, it takes time for them to likely germinate and reproduce. However, it is likely that once this moment does come, they will have leveled the planet's surface and can use it then as a breeding ground, terraforming both the entire surface and the atmosphere over time into a planet laden with the eggs of these monsters across its surface. They are also altered to a state that is conducive for their breeding, but toxic to other known forms of life. As the eggs develop in the ground, they slowly swell in size, and when it is time for them to leave the planet, they release a potent burst of pure energy as a propellant to blast off into space, where they will then float in the void for an untold amount of time. Though hopefully for the species, not too long, so they can arrive at a new planet and begin the process all over again. There is likely a planet out in the multiverse where these creatures do originate from, but details on the primary homeworld are impossible to know. Though it is safe to assume that it is likely similar in form and structure to what planets are left as once they have been converted for Guzzlord use. Because of their existence as marauders in the most literal sense, Guzzlord are properly equipped to be able to deal with any hazard that might otherwise try and pose a threat to them. While the fleshy bodies seem to be soft and defensively weak, the hard rubber hide on the outside of their bodies acts as an excellent shock absorber and thus can allow them to take a tremendous degree of punishment before finally succumbing to injuries. Aside from this, their entire biology is designed for the sole purpose of eating, growing, and preparing for reproduction. In order to make the most of any planet they decide to dine on, these monsters are highly specialized for processing raw materials, possessing an organ in the back of the throat that is able to instantly convert matter into pure energy, which they then use to both fuel themselves and help to start germinating eggs inside of them, if they are close to being capable of actually laying them. This sort of energy intake would normally be too much for most organ systems to handle, but these beasts have gone to the trouble of minimizing their organ presence as much as possible. As while they do have a circulatory, respiratory, and muscular systems and brain, almost everything else is either useless or non-existent, and they do not seem to be severely hampered by this lack of identifiable organ tissue. This would also explain their incredible sense of sight, as they can see both visible light and infrared light to best analyze their surroundings and target objects that are within their reach clearly and precisely with their twin tongues, even using them to create wiggling tractor beams of energy to draw food in from afar. Moreover, the need for higher intelligence to perform their biological functions is limited, so to save energy, their brains are limited in their function in regard to higher order thinking skills, resulting in them often being extremely violent and quick to anger, as they only need to rely on their instinctual urge to consume in order to survive and propagate their species. Poipolenaganado, Ultra Beast Homeworld, Ultramegalopolis. The homeworld of Poipolenaganado is believed to be the world where Ultramegalopolis is located, but it is difficult to say with any degree of certainty just what exactly the rest of the world is like, as the city is the only part of the world that has been explored to a significant degree. Given that the family has effectively been domesticated in a larval state, it is fair to assume that the city itself is an artificial environment for them and not the one they're used to growing and developing within. As such, it is difficult to ascertain the specifics of their natural environment and habitats, but given that the people of this world seem to be nearly identical to humans in terms of anatomy and behavior, it can be tentatively assumed that the world may likely be much like Earth. If this is the case, then the members of the poipole family, given their wasp-like natures, may dwell within forested environments like many other insectoids of the type do, and face similar environmental challenges as a consequence. As far as the adaptation to the native homeworld can be seen with Poipolenaganado, it is not entirely certain what there is to expect from them, as the family has been completely changed because of domestication within the city of Ultramegalopolis, so it can only be assumed that these natural habitats are designed for one basic niche, and given the combat attributes, that seems to be a role as a predator. It is first noted that both members of this family are adapted to view their surroundings in thermal vision, though whether or not this has always been the case, or is a unique adaptation born of the events that stole the natural light from Ultramegalopolis, is not entirely certain. At a young age, poipole are nowhere near as powerful as their evolved form, but can still prove to be a serious threat to deal with as a consequence of their headspace being mostly filled with a viscous toxic liquid with incredible adhesive properties, meaning that they are likely adapted to hunt for fast-moving prey. This is because the liquid, though not always lethal on its own, can stick to a potential target and in turn coat them in a toxin as it slowly makes them ill and unable to fight back, if not deceased with enough time. These beasts seem to get a kick out of this, showing that their domestication has not completely overwritten their aggressive predatorial instincts. If these creatures are given the artificial assistance they need to evolve, they become even more of a threat as Naganado, with immense volumes of lethal poison held inside the abdomen and stinger. The evolution of true flight within these creatures, and not just electromagnetic repulsion, plus the enhanced mobility that comes with it, suggests that they are adapted to hunt for much faster prey than poipole, and the acquisition of dragon-like attributes can be seen as a way of arming them with greater defenses against a lot of energy-based attacks. Altogether, alongside their extremely vicious and aggressive natures, this suggests that Naganado, with their biological form, behavior, and accessible powers, are likely an apex predator on their home world. This would also make sense given that poipole in captivity are bred to be unable to reach an adult state without artificial assistance, so even the people of the homeworld fear what these beasts are actually capable of. While further information on possible environmental adaptations is difficult to ascertain from this, it can at least be said here that these beasts seem to be able to adapt to nearly any type of environment, minus cold as a consequence of their dragon-like properties, and in turn are likely a terrifying force to be reckoned with no matter what combat situation they might find themselves within. Stakataka, Ultra Beast Homeworld, Ultra Crag. There have been no known successful voyages to the homeworld of Stakataka, as portals to the homeworld have not been found in Ultra Space, so what is known about the homes of these creatures is derived from their biological and behavioral attributes. As such, the tentative title of this world is the Ultra Crag, having been given this name mainly on the basis of it likely existing as a rugged mountainous environment. Given that Stakataka are likely a fungus of some sort biologically, it can be surmised from their existence that the climate and terrain of their homeworld may at least be relatively damp and has accessible water or some other life-sustaining liquid as part of its natural features. And because individual units of Stakataka see the world through electromagnetism, it can also be stated that the world may be devoid of light to some degree, and the terrain itself might be highly magnetic. While the latter point is not currently known for certain, the existence of Ultramegalopolis and its inhabitants being able to survive without natural light gives credence to the former point. Moreover, given that the bodies of Stakataka are made from an excessive amount of stone and metal, it suggests that both are readily available resources to the creatures as they grow and develop, hinting at the world being very rich in metallic ore. Lastly, given the form that they take, it is likely that it is a form of imitation for something that is present in the home world, and because of their tower-like form, such objects may in turn likely be common in the world, hinting at them sharing the world with some sort of civilization that is at least equivalent to contemporary terrestrial medieval Europe in terms of technological advancement. The unusual forms of Stakataka are extremely rugged and sturdy, and are able to resist both direct attack and those from afar with surprising efficiency. And given just how strong they actually are, it is clear that not only are their forms likely adapted to ward off attacks from potential predators, but that they could be considered fodder to others, as they are weak individually and band together as both a cohesive mental collective in order to survive. This would also explain why they exist as a collective entity in the first place, because, just as with some types of terrestrial fungus, these creatures are able to use parts of their form, in their case the magnetic field that they naturally generate, to pass information quickly between individual constituents and thus form an intelligence network far greater than what they could be capable of generating on their own, coordinating their movements quickly in order to attack and defend themselves as a cohesive whole. A world absent of light can also be connected to how they perceive their environment, as the magnetic energy that holds the individual units together also allows them to observe their surroundings through the electromagnetic fields given off by both the local terrain and other organisms, and this goes for both the small square units that comprise the collective's legs and the rectangular units that comprise their main body. What really makes Stakataka stand out, however, is the fact that the form they take as a collective is very reminiscent of that used by terrestrial humans to construct stone towers as part of castles or just standalone structures, as such a form serves a twofold purpose. For one thing, such a form is not exactly common in nature, and it could likely be said that they are designed to imitate the stone towers made by a possible advanced civilization, because predators are either unlikely to attack something that they see and know isn't food, or otherwise would be leery of going anywhere near a structure that could house something capable of actually killing them. Second, this imitation is easy for them to create and thus allows them to save on resources, as it is also likely that, while they can see and imitate the outer form of a tower, their hollow insides show that they do not know the interior structure, thus imitating it based on outer visuals alone. Combined with their capacity to simply plod away if they are discovered, and the capacity to use their massive forms to deliver extremely powerful physical attacks, this would render these creatures both effective mimics in their own right and imposing figures that can make potential predators think twice before even considering attacking them. Blacephalon, Ultra Beast Homeworld, Ultra Energon. There have been no known successful voyages to the homeworld of Blacephalon, as portals to the homeworld have never been found in ultra space, so what is known about the home of these creatures is derived from their biological and behavioral attributes. As such, the tentative title of this world is the Ultra Energon, having been given this name mainly on the basis that Blacephalon themselves seem to be in a state of condensed energy with an unusually low recorded mass for their size. The bodies of Blacephalon seem to not only be in a state of dimensional flux, but are also energy constructs for the most part, and given that such states are not normal to see together in any terrestrial sense, it is likely that this unique construct is a product of the homeworld, a habitat likely in a state of dimensional flux that is made mostly out of a crystal-like substance that exists as a physical manifestation of energy. The crystalline surface of the homeworld exists in a number of energetic states, with most of the world being stable in nature, but containing vast quantities of crystals that are made from raw, more volatile phases of condensed energy that likely snake through the planet in deep deposits. This means that their homeworld, and likely most of the creatures that populate it, may be in a similar state of instability, where an overload of energy, thermal energy in particular, can result in explosive consequences. While it likely would be safe to traverse if possible, the high energy readings of the planet could damage artificial equipment not built to endure such an environment, and therefore might not be safe to attempt colonization on. In order to adapt to the homeworld, these creatures have a physical form that is in a constant state of dimensional flux, meaning that only part of their form is actually anchored in the reality that we occupy. This not only helps to explain their surprisingly low mass despite their notable size, but it is also an attribute these creatures have learned to use well, as they can phase in and out of reality in order to slither their forms across the ground to surprise and attack others, with seemingly little holding their bodies in a rigid state for bipedal locomotion, further explaining why they are considered to be partial ghost types. Since they themselves are made partially of condensed energy, these creatures are in need of it constantly and have adapted unique forms perfectly, as already noted, to sneakily approach and then steal life energy from other creatures before slithering away out of sight. Moreover though, their capacity to use energy as a weapon with their own internal power reserves is a notable attribute of them, with almost every single attack at their disposal naturally being a special attack of some sort. Their choice of using energy in general as a weapon may seem odd at first given that they occupy a planet of creatures in a similar state as them, but it is likely to use such attacks to strike out and defend themselves with in order to cause a systematic energy overload and potential living threats on their homeworld, the energy influx triggering the unstable volatile energy inside of others and forcing the liberation of said energy through explosions. This also applies to the mind-blown attack, as they can convert their otherwise stable internal energy reserves into an unstable form, draining much of their energy in the process, and then infuse it into their head before lobbing it at others, as it explodes in a shower of light and heat akin to a large firework going off. The extensive use of fire and thermal energy in general, as a consequence, helps to trigger such unstable reactions consistently, and given that they may observe the surroundings through thermal heat, it can be said they are able to make good use of their natural powers to render themselves a viable threat to all sorts of creatures, terrestrial or not.
Thank you all for tuning into this episode, and I hope that this analysis of the Ultra Beasts and the Homeworlds has given you the opportunity to understand a bit more about these creatures and what they have to say about the origins of their unique forms within the worlds they occupy. Keep your eyes peeled for these beasts if you're ever fortunate or unfortunate enough to actually encounter them, as we look to the stars above and get ready for the next episode of the V.T.P. thank you for watching this video. It brings me great joy to be able to speak to you all in the world each and every time we meet like this, to explore the many different facets of both the world of Pokemon as we know it, and the world as we live it, through every adventure we have with Pokemon by our side. If you'd like to, please subscribe, ring the bell and all that jazz, to keep yourself updated on content uploads and other materials of the like. You can also follow me on Twitter if you'd like to know right away when something new is uploaded, and my written works, from which most of this is based on, can be found on DeviantArt. Links to both can be found in the description down below. Remember that the world of Pokemon is a place full of wonder and mystery, and you never know what to expect. So, stay vigilant, keep watch, and always be prepared for the unexpected. Until next time, trainers and friends of all sorts, have a wonderful time.